Welcome to Mr. Brandt's 5th grade Everyday Math Review. In this video we are going to be reviewing lesson 6.9, which is multiplication of decimals. As you can see, I've got two problems here, and I'm going to do each problem two different ways. The first time I'm going to show you my preferred method, and then the second one I'm going to show you another method that the book shows. So I'm going to start and I'm going to rewrite my problems. So I'm going to go 26 and 5/10 times, let's get a different color, 35 and 8/10. And the first thing I'm going to do with each of those is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to estimate the answer. And to do that, I'm going to round each number to the greatest place. So 26 and 5/10 to the nearest 10 would round to 30. 35 and 8/10 to the nearest 10 would round to 40. So 30 times 40 is 1,200. I'm going to save this for later, but I'm going to go ahead now and multiply out this problem. Now when I write it down, there's decimals, but when I go to multiply, I don't think about the decimals right now. I just multiply like it's two whole numbers. So the process for multiplying using the traditional method is the same whether it's whole numbers or decimals. So we have to multiply all the numbers on the top times the ones place, and well, it's the tenths place, but in this case, so we're going to go by the pink 8. So 5 times 8 is 40. 6 times 8 is 48, plus 4 is 52. 2 times 8 is 16, plus 5 is 21. So I'm done with all those pink numbers, and now I'm going to move on to the green. Now in this case, with the decimal, it's the ones place, but we're going to think about it as being the tens place. So I'm going to add my 0 like we typically would do. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 5 is 30, plus 2 is 32. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 3 is 13. So now I'm done with the green, and I'm going to move on to the yellow. In this case, we have to have two zeros, and we're going to multiply all the numbers on top times the 3. So 5 times 3 is 15. 6 times 3 is 18, plus 1 is 19. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. Now that I have all of my multiplying done, I can add those together. So 0, 2 plus 5 is 7. 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 5 is 8. 2 plus 3 is 5, plus 9 is 14. 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 7 is 9. So my estimate was 1,200. So I'm going to use this estimate to help me place the decimal, and the closest I can get to 1,200 with the digits I have here is 948. So I'm going to place my decimal here. So 26 and 5/10 times 35 and 8/10 is 948 and 70 hundredths. Again, hopefully you're able to see how I use my estimate to help me place my decimal. I'm looking to see, after getting my answer, what's the closest I can get to my estimate, and then place the decimal there. So same thing with this problem. We have 27 hundredths times 4 and 6/10. And you may notice that when we write these down, it's not like adding or subtracting. We do not have to line up the decimals for multiplying. They can be a little bit offset. They can be staggered. So I'm going to start again with my estimate. And this is a little bit trickier to estimate because we can't really round this to 0. So I'm going to round this to 3/10 or 30 hundredths. And this one to the nearest 1, 4 6/10 would round to 5. So it's going to be 5.00. So 3/10 times 5/10 is 15/10, which is the same as 1.5. Hopefully you see how I came up with that. Remember, when we multiply a number by another number smaller than 1, we're going to get a smaller answer. So that's another way to help you think about that. But let's go ahead and multiply that out. 7 times 6 is 42. 2 times 6 is 12, plus 4 is 16. And then 0 times 6 is 0, plus 1 is 1. So I'm done with the green. So now we're going to move to the ones place here, which we're going to think about as being the tens place because we're not using the decimals at all. So I'm going to put my 0 down. 7 times 4 is 28. 2 times 4 is 8, plus 2 is 10. Now I can add those together. 2 plus 0 is 2. 6 plus 8 is 14. 1 plus 1 is 1, and then our 1 here. So our estimate was 1 5/10. So we can think about this again as being, or what's the closest I can get to that? Well, the closest I can get would be putting the decimal here. So 1 142 thousandths. Now I'm going to leave this work here, and I'm going to show you one other thing to think about. Instead of doing an estimate, we could multiply like we did here, and then we can look to see how many digits are behind decimals in the problem. So in our whole problem, there's 2 digits behind the decimal. So if we come down here, there has to be 2 digits behind our decimal in the problem here. Hopefully it's still recording here. And so same thing, if we come over here, we have 3 digits behind decimals in our problem. So as you can see, we have 3 digits behind our decimal in the answer. Okay, another way that the everyday math shows you how to think about problems like this is by turning each of these numbers into a whole number first. And we can think about that by, in this case, we'd have to move the decimal 1 place to the right. And moving that 1 place to the right is the same thing as multiplying it by 10 to the first. So then if we looked at this number, 35 8/10, again, we move that decimal to the right. That's the same as 10 to the first. So if we have 10 to the first times 10 to the first, that's going to be the same as 10 to the second. And I'm going to write that right here, 10 to the second. Now, to save some time, I'm not going to go through the whole multiplication again, but when we multiplied, in this case, since we moved the decimals, it will be 265 times 358. Let me go ahead and rewrite that right here. 265 times 358. The digits that we would get would be 94870. and all numbers have a decimal. It comes at the end. Before we multiplied, we moved the decimals to the right, an equivalent of times 10 to the second. Now we have to do the opposite. So the opposite would be dividing by 10 to the second. So if we move it one place, that would be the same as dividing by 10 to the first. We have to do it again, which is dividing by 10 to the first. Sorry, that's very small. So our decimal point is going to go between the 8 and the 7. And that's the same answer that we saw in the previous problem, just a different way of thinking about it. Okay, for this next one here, I'll try to write it a little bit bigger. So again, we have to, this time, to get a whole number, we have to move it 2 to the right. So that would be times 10 to the first times 10 to the first, which is the equivalent of times 10 to the second. For 4 6/10, it has to move 1, so times 10 to the first. So with times 10 to the second and times 10 to the first, that's the equivalent of times 10 to the third. So if we multiplied this out, 0 and 27 hundredths times 4, or excuse me, I made a mistake on that. We should think about this as whole numbers. So 27 times 46. Then when we answer that, we get the digits of 1, 1, 4, and 2. All whole numbers have a decimal, comes at the end. Before we multiplied, we did the equivalent of times 10 to the third. Now that we have our answer, we have to do the opposite. So we have to divide by 10 to the first, divide by 10 to the first, and divide by 10 to the first. So that's our equivalent to dividing by 10 to the third. Our decimal point goes there, so our answer would be 1 and 142 thousandths. This we had some division of fractions. So I'm going to try to do this really quickly because I'm running out of time. So I've got 1/3 divided by 4. And for this one, I'm going to use a number line. So I've got 0 and 1. And then I have to divide it into thirds. So this will be 1/3, 2/3. That shouldn't be a 0. That should be a 1. Or also 3/3. So if we take 1/3 and divide it into 4, that means we have to make each third section into 4 equal sections. So we're going to look at this part here. After dividing, we get our one piece here out of how many? Well, let's count. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 1/3 divided by 4 is equal to 1/12. The last practice problem, we have 1/5 divided by 7. And this time I'm going to show you a different way of thinking about it. We used a picture with the last time. And I want you to think about that dividing by 7 is equal to or is the same as multiplying by 1/7. So I'm going to take 1/5 divided by 7, and I'm going to think about that as being equal to 1/5 times 1/7. And now, knowing that, I know how to multiply fractions. You just multiply the numerators. So 1 times 1 is 1. Then we multiply the denominators. 5 times 7 is 35. And we get 1/35. So 1/5 divided by 7 equals 1/35. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.